Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and RIBA members. Welcome to Let's Build. Thank you for joining us at this, our 15th in a series of our Let's Build events. This is our first event this year, 2022, and as always, it's focused on revitalizing the construction industry by heightening representation and inclusivity through these live debates. Our keynote speaker, Neil Pinder, FRIBA, says, and I quote, "There's only one Earth and one planet, fact. We are all one race, the human race, fact. Subsequently, everyone in this one diverse rainbow community should all have a say in this future, fact." The issue of diversity is actually a very broad one. It transcends the more obvious ones, which are race and skin color, and really should embrace all aspects of diversity, both visible and invisible, able and disabled, neurological and sexual differences. Our panelists today will be addressing these issues, both from a personal and professional perspective, and we hope to dive deep and offer some simple solutions by the way we think about this and then how we treat one another. Each of our panelists will bring a different perspective to the debate based on their own lived experiences. We know that BAME/diverse architects face many challenges in practice, but what of those whose diversity is invisible and yet suffer silently in the workplace? How do we ensure that we put our humanity first so that it becomes the driver in shaping our environment and inadvertently saving our planet? My name is Annette Amanda Oyekunle Fisher, and I am the founder and chair of Let's Build, partner of FA Global, and founder and co-chair Union, a consortium of female-led architects practices, and now an LHC appointed company. My practice focuses on community-led projects in UK and mass affordable housing in Nigeria. I was the first Black woman to be elected to the RIBA Council in 1999. I've been an RIBA vice president and was a nominated RIBA presidential candidate. I've over 30 years experience in practice and have designed buildings internationally, led bid teams in the UK, Nigeria, and the USA, and I am your moderator for this evening. The theme for this event is diversity critical to saving our planet? So now I'll go on and introduce our panelists. We have 6 panelists. One of them is our keynote speaker. And the first is Paris Wilson. She's a senior accessibility and inclusive design consultant at MEMA. And over the last 5 years, Paris has successfully delivered transformational change, social inclusion, accessibility, and inclusive design projects across the rail, health, government, and construction sector. Conscientious and committed to considering and understanding multidimensional human characteristics in solution development, Paris puts people and inclusion at the heart of delivery to mobilize accessible and sustainable solutions for clients and the communities they serve. Paris is a member of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals and the Access Association UK. Testament to Paris's commitment to accessibility for all and industry impact is her nomination to the Disability Power List 100 list, Shaw Trust 2021. By harnessing the widest range of ideas through neurodiversity, we can design better, sustainable, inclusive solutions that protect our planet for future generations. Marsha Ramroop started as the Director of Inclusion at the Royal Institute of British Architects in February last year. Previously, she ran her own strategic inclusion consultancy called Unheard Voice and worked on inclusive journalism for 25 years. She roots her approach to inclusion in cultural intelligence, CQ, which she describes as how to get sustained and sustainable outcomes in diversity and inclusion. I've always said that how we perceive value needs to change. If we can change how we consider value by looking beyond pounds and pence and think instead how we value each other and how we value the planet, then we can reclaim our humanity and thrive in balance with our environment. Julian McIntosh is the director and founder of Julian Mackintosh Architects. He's been mentioned as one of the brightest young stars in architecture, following his debut as both an architect and presenter in season 3 of BBC Two's Your Home Made Perfect. His training has taken him far and wide, starting in Huddersfield, then to China and Spain for 2 years, and finishing in London. After completing his training, he spent 3 years at a high-end residential London practice, designing luxury homes, before setting up his own architectural company. Determined to bring premium architecture to the wider community and make it more accessible to people from all backgrounds. Julian brings to the industry a surprising and fresh perspective, not scared to present controversial and brave designs to his clients to achieve the most favorable use of space. Deborah Sant is a co-founder of the Architecture, Urban Design and Spatial Research Studio, DSDHA, with the aim of fostering positive change and empowering communities and creating social value through collaboration and meaningful engagement. Their work has been recognized with 19 RIBA awards to date, shortlisted for the RIBA Sterling Prize, and twice nominated for the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture and the Mies van der Rohe Award. Much of Deborah's current work is concerned with democratizing architecture, having set up the Jane Drew Prize in Architecture and helping to redefine the role of architecture in the 21st century. Addressing people's emerging needs in the context of rapidly shifting environmental, technological, and social conditions. Alongside her work in practice, she is founding director and trustee of the London School of Architecture, which focuses on broadening access for the profession and building new collaborative forms of research and practice. Hannah Afolabi Neo Sundina is the development director for Balfour Beatty Investments, seconded into Eastwick and Sweetwater Limited, a joint venture with Places for People. In her role, she manages the feasibility, business planning, budget, design, programming, and planning of the mixed-use regeneration project of circa 1,900 homes on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. Hannah is also the vice chair of the University of Greenwich Construction, Property and Surveying Practices. She's industry chair of the University of Greenwich's Construction, Property and Surveying Practice, Industry Advisory Board, and is a member of Estates Gazette's Diversity and Inclusion Content Advisory Panel. Most notably, Hannah founded Black Women in Real Estate, BWRE, an organization that brings together Black women in property with the intent for them to connect. Real estate is an industry, is far-reaching and touches the lives of every type of person. The industry needs innovative solutions to solve problems in the built environment, and this requires diverse voices, views, and people in the decision-making process. Our keynote speaker is Neil Pinder, FRIBA. He has taught in a number of inner city schools for over 25 years, working with London Open House for much of that time. He's a trustee of Blueprint, formerly the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust, for the past 15 years, and currently head of product design and architecture at Graveney School in South London, where he introduced architecture to the curriculum, winning various open house competitions and being honored as Open House Teacher of the Year. One of his initiatives is Celebrating Architecture, which he started up to recognize the work of young, talented, non-traditional and traditional students at Graveney School, for which he has received national recognition. Guest speakers have included Baroness Doreen Lawrence, Professor Chris Wise and Wayne Hemingway, alongside some of the most prestigious national and international architectural practices, for example, HOK and Populous. He's been a guest speaker at RIBA events, encouraging teachers to deliver architecture in the classroom, an Arkwright interviewer for prestigious engineering scholarship at Imperial College and Cambridge University. He's organized and coordinated a brutalist photography exhibition in collaboration with the London Festival of Architecture and led architectural workshops at the RCA in collaboration with the Architectural Foundation, which is supported by the Mayor of London. Last summer, during the pandemic, he developed and implemented a successful initiative called GLAM, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Architecture, and Me, More recently, he's been awarded the NLA New London Architecture Hidden Hero Award and a Lifetime Award by Sound Advice. Now he's Honorary Fellow of the RIBA and the RSA and an Honorary Professor at the Bartlett. I give you Neil Pinder.
Thank you very much, Annette, for those really nice words. And thank you, everyone, for allowing me to express myself on this absolutely fantastic platform. And thank you to our fellow panelists, who I'm sure are going to give us a really enthralling debate and representation of what diversity means to saving the planet. But before we begin, what I'd like to do is just give you a small tip of a film that we made. If I can have the share, that would be absolutely fantastic. So there it is. So everybody just sit back, listen to the music and watch the video. Here we go. Just let me put it on full screen. There we go. So here we go.
Small minds discuss other people. Gossip. Good minds discuss events. Great minds discuss ideas.
What about sunrise? What about rain? What about all the things that you said we were to gain? What about killing fears? Is there a time? What about all the things that you said was yours and mine? Did you ever stop to notice all the blood we shed before? Did you ever stop to notice this crying earth, this weeping shore?
One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for watching that film. And as you can see, thank you, Annette. I'm passionate about saving this planet. As you can see from the film, part of the video is centered around the rainforest and its indigenous people who are like us. In December 1968, a Brazilian rubber tapper and environmentalist activist, Chico Mendes, predicted he would not live until Christmas, which was shortly before his 44th birthday. At first, he said, "I thought I was fighting to save the rubber trees. Then I thought I was fighting to save the Amazon rainforest. Now I realize I'm fighting to save humanity." 3 days later, before Christmas, Mendes was shot dead. Since Mendes' murder, more than 450,000 square kilometers of Amazon and area bigger than the California has been destroyed, primarily in Brazil, but also in Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, and French Guyana. That equivocates to an average of 10,000 acres, which is equivalent to 5,500 football pitches every single day being destroyed. Scientists say that the Amazon has suffered losses at an accelerated rate since Bolsonaro took office in 2019. The Brazilian president has encouraged agricultural mining activities in the world's largest rainforest. The Amazon is home to 3 million species of plants and animals and 1 million indigenous people that look like us. The Amazon is home to the greatest expanse of forest. The rate of loss has increased by more than 30%. The Amazon historically is a carbon absorber, since trees take in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. Now releases more carbon than stores, which adds to rather than reduces our global climate crisis, which as much as 17% of the Amazon forest lost already. Scientists believe that the tipping point will be reached at 20 to 25% of deforestation. Even if climate change was stopped today, it is predicted that global temperatures would rise to 4 centigrade. Much of central, eastern, and southern Amazon will certainly become barren land. The World Green Building Council was formed in 2002, and with countries of Australia, Brazil, Canada, India, Japan, Mexico, Spain, and the USA, with no one like us. Buildings are responsible for more than 40% of global carbon emissions and 50% of global carbon materials. 91% of people and their families live in there with their air pollution levels, which exceeds World Health Organization limits. People spend 90% of their time indoors. So the quality of the indoor environment is crucial in fighting infectious diseases and transmission. By 2020, the global population will be increased by 9.8 billion, and the world's building stock will double, accelerating devastation, environmental, social, and economical impact of the built environment. For all of these reasons, it is about us. Now, what I'm going to show you is my second film, which deals with the language that architects use. And what we've got to understand is architects use specific language to elevate themselves and not so elevate other people. So here is my second film, and here we go. Right, let's blow this up.
Not be able to stay home, brother. You will will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised.
Thank you for that. And as I said, Annette, please excuse the Homegrown Plus because it should have been Let's Build, but this is one of our original videos. But as you can see from that clip, or that small film, what we're looking at is we're looking at the language, the power that architects have in their hands. And we have to make sure that the language that they use encompasses, engages, infuses, and makes everybody feel welcome and not alienate people from any part of society. So there we go. Please feel free to ask questions if you want. You're on silent.
Neil, thank you so much. That is such two very powerful videos with really important messages that we need to take away. One of them being about the language. It's amazing how something so simple can just a change, a little tweak in the way in which we speak about the built environment, that we can make it accessible purely just in terms of the way we do that. And then just that really powerful "What About Us" video with, you know, with all those wonderful references. They're very strong references, but they're real, we know, and they've become even more so during and post the pandemic. Excuse me, and these are messages that we really need to take to heart and examine. Well, the panelists now are going to actually take some of this and be able to sort of examine how we're looking at this and where what diversity truly means and how we use it on our planet. And so at this point, I'll turn to our panelists and we will start the Q&A. And Neil, of course, you will join in on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Annette. And we've just got to remember that 2050 is the tipping point if we don't do anything. 2050.
very much so. Thank you, Neil.
I think that the key word is practical, I think, and climate change is a massive subject, really. And I think thinking about some of the work that I've done, one of the first projects that I did was creating a pavilion to show art. And one of the artists that we'd asked to work with us ended up being a specialist in reusing materials. So we were hoping to build this new, relatively flashy pavilion, and she'd come along and said, why don't you think about reusing materials? It really I didn't think about that in the first place, but having a discussion, I think, is a really practical starting point of, taking key steps to support climate change, actually having discussions about what climate change is and learning from other people that might have, further skill or, other individuals and companies that might be researching these things, as I'd said, working with this artist, an artist that we've now gone on to work with, repeatedly. She teaches material reuse at London University, has been a key thing that we've started to bring into our architecture. And through that discussion and discussions like today, it's a way of starting to think how you can, play a part in, affecting climate change. So I think discussion for me is one of the first things. I think discussion then leads on to strategy. And myself, I've done strategy, architecture, urban design, across the construction industry is one of the, key components of getting projects right. And I think that finding the right strategy, whether you're, retrofitting a building, in the briefing stage of an architecture project, we always discuss with clients, do you want to use this building? What is the strategy behind reusing this building, or a strategy behind creating a new building? And then what are the kind of sustainable functions that we can build into that strategy? And through having discussions before we get to that stage, we can advise clients and we can discuss some of the challenges that would work within specific strategies. And again, I've found that quite interesting in discussions leading to strategies, and the fact that clients and people that would like to design and have buildings are actually pushing the boundaries now. We had one client that had been wanted to create a sustainable dance studio, and she'd actually reached out to suppliers and started looking at honeycomb insulation and where she can, procure these items. So that discussion led into a strategy. And then I think from there, the third thing, into an architectural sense and a construction sense, is to take that strategy and find products, find the services that can support a way of creating sustainable spaces, obviously reducing our carbon emissions to support climate change, sorry. But I think a joined up approach is a really interesting thing of taking something from a discussion, learning something that you might see on a project that you've inhabited. I went to see The Bridge by Carl Turner, which is a project about reuse and, a building that can be stripped down and, used again. And, it made me think, can we, make more buildings like this? It's very interesting. So discussion, strategy, and then finding a solution through, interesting products that are out there, and different consultants, passive house consultants and such, that can support you to create great projects. That's my thoughts on that.
Anna, what's your view in terms of coming from the development side?
I think as a developer, and actually with where the world is going, developers are being forced to And this is if they don't have the conscious desire to want to think about climate change and sustainability, to consider in their approach. On East Wick and Sweetwater, we had, and kudos to the LLDC for setting such high sustainability standards, but fabric efficiencies was a massive thing for us, and it forced us as a design team, so not just as a developer, but as the architects, to reconsider what we're doing and how we're designing the actual built form and the shapes of the buildings themselves, to enable them to be as efficient as possible when doing the calculations. And for so long we'll have insects and step back in buildings, but actually that reduces the fabric efficiency. And so it's been a whole learning experience. And so what we had done at the very start of post phase 1 was set out a sustainability brief and strategy, and that became the benchmark that all of the architects had to work on. We had 5 different architects working at the same time, but all of them knew that the sustainability criteria was key. And so your fabric efficiency was important, your overheating analysis, and where, depending on where the buildings were located across the site, our embodied carbon targets were really important, where we can reuse materials in and around the existing area. We were looking at things like that, and that's because we had the desire to be consciously sustainable, and we were going above and beyond the building regulations as well. But with building regulations changing and generally regulations changing, there is going to have to be a push for developers to ensure that they are delivering more sustainable buildings.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time. We're going to move on to the next question, which is what does sustainability really mean, Deborah?
Oh, well, it's a really huge subject, obviously, as we're discussing this evening. But I think you can break it down to certain really, what we tend to do in our studios is break it down to issues of justice, really. At the end of the day, what we've been talking about is power and the effects of who's got power and who's listening and who isn't. And this intersection between sort of climate justice, social justice and economic justice all come together in spatial justice. So we're kind of fighting sustainability on all these fronts as architects. So I think that's why I really enjoy looking at the UN Sustainability Development Goals, because they do actually ask you to pull back. And absolutely, we've got to look at our fabric first approach and our, I love the guidance, like Hannah was just saying, like Leti, the amazing organization Leti, which have made all of this sort of material and energy sort of carbon footprint analysis really practical, is wonderful. But at the same time, rather like in Neil's video, you have to have the big idea. And if you go to the UN Sustainability Development Goals, they are really good at pulling it back to the scale of why are people leaving the countryside and going to cities? Why are we flying across the world and expending energy on this kind of global economy? Why are we not thinking more sort of politically at a local level? So I think for me, sustainability is about tying up across those 3 territories under sort of the heading of spatial justice. And for me, that comes down to really making cities fairer, more equitable places.
Great, thank you for that, making them fairer and pulling those 3 strands together. Paris, do you have any comments on that?
Well, many of you might know that I am not an architect, but what I am is an accessibility and inclusive design practitioner, and my background is in human rights and justice law. So I approach a lot of these topics from a sort of social justice lens. And I think what's really interesting is I'm currently reading a book called Atomic Habits. I'm sure many of you know of or heard of that book. And it's really interesting because Deborah mentioned about the SDGs just now, and actually they're quite goal focused. They're kind of outcome focused, no poverty, etc. And actually to get to, from what I've learned from the book so far, to get to these end goals, you need to have you need to think about the processes and the systems that will enable you to get there. And then we're talking about habits that enable you to change what you do, that will enable you to change and influence the environment around you, so much so that the end goal is met and more. And it's really interesting because I do think sometimes, as someone who works alongside architects often and other built environment professionals on projects, I do think sometimes we become a little bit goal-centered and don't necessarily think about the systems and the processes and the habits that are needed to get there. So it's just food for thought, totally different lens and approach that I've taken on that. But yeah, that's my opinion.
No, thank you very much, Paris, because I think that's really important, because with any goal, what you say, which marries with what Deborah was saying, is you actually have to break it down. You have to break it down into the steps that will actually help you get there. So very important aspect about the processes and the systems that are needed. So moving on to the next question, what advice can be given to people to enable diverse contributions to climate change? Hannah.
I think fundamentally, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about wanting to have diverse thought around the table, is ask questions. If you're in a room where everyone is agreeing with you, if you're in a room where everyone looks like you, then you are not getting the best out of that conversation, especially where it's got to do with furthering or changing an environment. You know, and I'll speak of London because London is my experience, and that's actually where I grew up. We have a massively diverse community, and typically what you have is a very non-diverse group of people designing, building, commenting, approving, being on the committees of these of our planning committees. Making decisions around the way the world looks and feels and works for every single person. If we can't start asking real questions, and I'm not talking about, public consultation as a tick box exercise, I'm talking about real questions and people really caring about how our homes are designed. If the road works, or the road systems work, if the landscaping works, if like a really good example, and I mentioned earlier when in our conversations, was around when I was designing a scheme in Canning Town. It was a town centre regeneration, and we had a paving strategy that was supposed to be the word escapes me now, but it was a paving strategy that was meant to be intuitive, and so the paving color would change for pedestrians, but there was no change in texture and or height, and so the vehicles would be driving on, let's say the grey side and the pedestrians on the blue side. But when we went through an analysis to see if people through an analysis about sustainability, one of the questions came out about partially impaired people being able to use that road system and actually being safe there, not knowing that the colours had changed because fundamentally they cannot see it. And for me, at least, that was a very clear moment in time where I took a step back to realise we keep designing things over and over again from a gaze or our perspective, whereas we need to start asking people who are using the spaces to really change it. And that fundamentally goes to the desire to ask real questions and get real answers and actually engage, and not just for developers, but architects, landscape consultants, engineers. Really let's ask the people who are living in our homes, in the buildings that we're designing, in the offices that they're sitting in, if it's working for them.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Yeah, we've got to put on a different lens. We've got to, be able to see through the lens of, of people, of all types of people from different cultural and different lived experiences, if we're going to get this right. So moving on. Sorry, Neil, were you going to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in because a couple of seconds ago, Deborah spoke about power and what people have got, I think what we need to realize is the people who have had the power, who've had the control and who've had the money, they're not going to give it up that easy. And I've posted a petition in there, and the petition is basically, and for people to sign, and it's there because we want this new way of living, so the sustainable way of living, for example, solar panels, etc. We want to be in control of, nationalized solar panels and the distribution of them, because as we move away from fossil fuels, because of the deterioration, etc., what we looked at, those guys are going to be jumping ship to see where the money is. Now, if the money is in distributing, making, and having the control of solar panels and the distribution of electricity, etc., power from those solar panels, if it's economically viable for them, they will jump in, gain control, and we're back into the same square one basis of where we were before. We have to, at this tipping point, we have to gain control. We can only do that by forming collaboration, parallel working collaborations, and making, as someone just said, parallel working systems so that we can move forward. If not, they'll be jumping from one ship to another ship and still having control and feeding us the narrative and feeding us the power which they want to make the money. So we've got to make sure we get loads of petitions, get loads of programs like this developed, where we're moving from one place to another place, that we have the power, the control, and the money gets recirculated to for the people who have and the people who have not, and as I said, people like us.
Absolutely, Neil. It is all about power and money at the end of the day. All of the isms are. And once you understand that, then we take a completely different approach to how we resolve this. And so we need to just get our last question before we move to a discussion with our audience. So, Marsha, how do we grow beyond political aesthetics to meet the 7 Sustainable Development Goals?
Yes, and I think this really just builds on the last few points that Neil and Deborah and Hannah have been making. And actually, I've written down here the exact words that you used, Deborah, a little bit earlier on about the fundamental reasons for needing these sustainability goals. How do we get to social justice, environmental justice, and so on? And you talked about spatial justice as well, Deborah. We need to have economic justice, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Naomi Klein and This Changes Everything, and she says our economic system and our planetary system are now at war, or more accurately, our economy is at war with many forms of life on Earth, including human life. What the climate needs to avoid collapse is contraction in humanity's use of resources. What our economic model demands to avoid collapse is unfettered expansion. Only one of these sets of rules can be changed, and it's not the laws of nature. And so, building on what Neil was saying there about this ownership and this sense of unfettered expansion and growth for the sake of growth being the problem, and needing to reel that in and start to look at not profit for profit's sake, but for reinvestment, for thinking about that economic models and those political models and those ideological models that can actually combat what has been up to this point perpetuating these inequalities, which when you look at the SDGs, the 17, they're all about how did we get to this in the first place? How did we get to the point where, it's not like we don't live in a world of plenty for some of us. So why are we asking the question, how is it that we have to now reach to a point of no poverty, and that we life below water is so compromised? It's because of the ideological, political, economic, financial systems that have capitalism essentially that has got us to this point where we now at war with ourselves, with our environment. And so when we think about growing beyond these political aesthetics, I like to think about things in terms of a cognitive evolution. So Einstein, I like to quote Einstein, he's known as saying, the quote attributed to him is, definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. What he actually said was, we cannot solve problems with the same level of consciousness which created them in the first place.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marsha. I've got to stop you there as we go into our, don't worry, we've got a bit more time for the Q&A, so you can still jump back in. Okay. All right, so now we'd like to welcome any questions from the audience. By all means, please put in a question in the chat and we'll put it to our panel. Okay, so we've got a question from Jim Rooney to everyone. Government retrofit policy for existing buildings to meet EPC by 2030, zero carbon by 2050. Up to 80% of our built environment is existing and inefficient and unsustainable. How will we strategically target this diversity to solving this problem? Who wants to take that first? How do we strategically target this diversity to solve this problem? And that's, basically, you will have seen that I think there's a planning application for the rebuilding of Marks and Spencer on Oxford Street, which has just been refused. It was going to be replaced by a 10-story building, and it's been refused for this reason, because the carbon that it will use to being replaced is going to be some 99 billion carbon whatevers than if it was being the existing building was being reused. So I think we're talking again about how we save our planet by minimizing, which is something you were touching on there, Marsha, the use of resources. Do you want to speak on that first?
Okay, so thank you, Jim, for your question. I think one of the things about how do we use our variety, if you like, to help strategically solve these problems, I think it does to some extent have to come from the leadership in the organizations. So, for example, I think the REBA has a part to play. I think the other built environment institutes have a part to play. I think engineering institutes have a part to play. And the part that I think that we need to play is about looking at setting a higher bar for our professions than is currently statutory regulation. Because one of the issues, I think, between our political and economic systems currently being so intertwined is there isn't an alternative way of being able to manage how we build and how we build sustainably. But if we ask of our members and demand of our members, in fact, that higher bar of sustainability, and we ensure that our institutes are being fed into with that diversity of thought, behavior, action, background, that we can actually start to create that movement where we can hold ourselves accountable for doing things differently, rather than just relying on policies and politics to ensure that we do.
Thank you, Marsha. Julian, do you have a comment on that? Julian?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and energy assessments are getting tougher, essentially. But I'd only really echo what's being said about holding ourselves accountable and actually asking the questions before they're asked of us, and thinking about how we approach projects slightly differently, but then what kind of resources, again, from a discussion with different people within the built environment, but what kind of approaches and strategies, again, things that have been said, can be taken, because there's always a cost element to this, and it has to be balanced out. And I've been in this discussion quite recently, and it does come up a lot of times, but I think that having good discussions about what the type of building structure you're working with, and what is the cost of reaching these targets. But even before the questions asked of you, trying to ask that question of yourself and the strategy that you take and the people that you can work with. And if that can be a diverse discussion, I think it's great.
Thank you so much.
Can I just give a quote at this specific point? The master's tool would never dismantle the master's house. And that is what we're set out with. You know, cost, everybody talks about cost, but the cost is humanity. That is what the ultimate cost is. And when you put the ultimate cost against profit, if you're really, really serious, there's no comparison. And, you know, when people are saying we've got to look at this cost, that cost, whatever, I just feel that they're just trying to throw you an illusion. Because at the end of the day, if you really want to do something and make sure you're doing it for longevity and a time using zero carbon as a goal, then you do everything possible. But if you want to throw every other sort of illusion in the mix, then you can do, but it's never going to save the planet. And as I read out, and I hate reading statistics, and I gave you a load of statistics earlier on, you know, we're heading 2050. They reckon that's the tipping point in the jungle, which is meant to be the lungs of our world. It's by 2025 if we carry on. So, I mean, what can people say to that? You know, let's address and Jim Rooney loves using this word, the elephant in the room. Let's address the elephant in the room. Let's, you know, attack the problem at the base. It's profit.
It is. Thank you, Neil. And that brings us very nicely on to Joe Gay's question, which says, the concept of return on investment is purely economic and does not incorporate carbon mitigation and climate adaptation. Therefore, demonstrating benefit within this system is impossible. And I think, you know, I was going to maybe ask, who can I think? Maybe Neil, you might kick off on that, or Marsha, because this comes back to something which actually Deborah was saying, which I agree with, is that we need to be looking at different ways of being architects and the way in which we create and shape our environment. Who'd like to kick off first on that?
Can I just jump in? Just one sec.
I
think Deborah's absolutely right, and we need to have architectural schools that think outside the box, and we need to have a new my students in school, and I'm always using them as soundboards. They want change, and they're the new generation that are coming through. People really want change, as you see from that one of the bits in the video, the song Desperito, or whatever, I called it wrong, sold 5 billion downloads, and everybody, and one of my kids said today, sir, it's 8 billion now, right? But it used up the energy for 40,000 homes for a year in America. You know, can we sustain this? Can we sustain? But YouTube is making a profit, so they're happy. So-and-so is making a profit, so they're happy. Can this honestly be sustained? We have to start with people like yourselves in the room, as Denzel Washington says, you know, and I don't necessarily put myself in this banner here, but great minds, you know, you can change things, great minds, but you just have to have the will to want to change.
Deborah, would you like to speak to that?
Well, it's turning into a bit of a Neil and Deborah loving. It always does, but I've got to think of something different to say to you, Neil, or else we'll be accused of being an echo chamber. But I do think it comes down to education, and our lobbying. I mean, we've talked about the need for everybody to have the language of the built environment in order to be empowered to talk about it, to take action, and to see, you know, lift the wool from our eyes about what's actually happening. But the big learning has to be with clients, and that is where, you know, that you need we do need the measurement of social value in our appraisal of things now, and that is the fantastic work the GLA are doing in making sure that social value and the new planning legislation is actually saying, what are you doing locally, what are you bringing to the project? And it's creating, I'm sure Hannah will attest to this, it is making people have to think differently. But I do think we need big thinking, and just, yeah, there's nudge and there's big thinking at the same time. And I mean, for me, I think behaviour change is so important. You know, you're talking about students. I teach at the London School of Architecture, and it's through collaborative working with students and professionals that we come up with whole new ways of using space. Oh, anyway, I could go on and on about the marvels of it's all about learning, which is something that Cedric Price said over 60 years ago, or nearly 60 years ago. If you want to empower people, you've got to teach them about the built environment. So that's why I'm always backing Neil. Sorry.
Annette, am I able to just add to
Yes,
Deborah?
I was just going to bring you in, Paris. Yes.
Thank you so much. Do you know, it's only because I had a thought pattern and I just thought, let me land it before I lose it, which was when Joe articulated in the chat box, you know, the concept of ROI, purely economic, and actually Deborah's point around social value, social impact, you know, the new social value policy, for example, and just how new that actually is in terms of people getting to grips with the nuance of how to apply that in the day-to-day of projects, including it at the front end of work stage 0, for example, and actually including it as part of your vision and strategy alongside social value, accessibility and inclusion and sustainability. You know, having those sorts of strategies is still quite new for people to actually come in a room and think about it. And, you know, it's just really difficult, I think, that until we look at social value as a whole, there's a part of me that thinks it's quite hard to think about carbon, you know, mitigation, climate adaptation in a sort of return of investment sort of way, if we can't even see the social value impact yet, and we're still having to quantify that. You know, I'm neurodivergent, I have dyspraxia. The way in which I engage with the built environment is really different to someone who's not dyspraxic. Most of the time, though, it takes a lot for me to articulate the reasons why it's important, for example, to, you know, design my, I've got a sliding door in my flat that opens onto my balcony. I have to think, you know, people won't necessarily consider designing a little button to flick up on the door handle to open it in an easy way. They won't necessarily think about someone with limited dexterity, whether that's someone with cerebral palsy or someone like myself who has dyspraxia. Why? Because quantifying it is hard. But actually, we need to move away from, which is what I think Joe is insinuating, moving away from this economic sort of value return. We need to get into the sort of the more holistic value in return, which is really, really important, which is something that I fight for a lot. But my second point was, lastly, I do think there's a hearts and minds thing here. And there's a part of me that thought, is openness critical to saving our planet? Is openness our hearts and minds? Do we have to take pride and go, yeah, pride, sit down. I'm going to accept that there are different ideas in a room here and that I actually need to hear people out. And there's a cultural piece here that I think isn't often brought into the discussions. We can bring a bunch of practitioners in, a bunch of different people with different thoughts and ideas. But if people aren't willing to actually say, let's be open to ideas, it's very hard to change the narrative. That's just my opinion.
Oh, I think that's fantastic, Paris. Yes. Should we be open? Is it our hearts and minds? I think it totally is, because for us to win over the financial drive, which has always been the way, and which we can't lose, but we need to redirect and reposition. We have a student who's got an interesting one here, which I think still plays into this discussion, which is, I'm interested in knowing how you all incorporate your values and ethics in your work linked to the built environment. And what does being an advocate for urban spaces look like to you? Julian, you've been a bit quiet. Do you want to say something? And then maybe Marsha.
Sure. I'd probably go back to the story I told at the beginning about this pavilion and working with this materials reuse artist. I learned a huge amount from engaging with this artist. And it was someone that I'd never worked with before. And she'd shown me a ring that she'd made. And it was a beautiful ring. I said, that's an amazing ring. Where'd you get that from? She said, I made it from recycled material. I said, okay. And she said, that's the point. We put so much, pride on having gold and silver and these things. But we can make beautiful things that mean something. She'd gone on to explain to me that that material can be made from ashes of someone that's close to you, or someone that you can connect a lived memory into a piece of material. But I think that then working with people in a way to learn and listen, like everyone's been saying today, is something that's really powerful, and it can create great work, and work that actually changes the way that we inhabit spaces. But also, going back to the story, what she taught myself in wanting to make this new pavilion, I had this idea about this, that we could use materials that we already had, and we did so, and we opened up this space, and people could actually understand the story of what a material can do that is just lying around in front of you. And then they could understand the story of how different people that have different thoughts, different backgrounds. Marla's a Cypriot woman. She's born in Cyprus and has a very different lived experience to me. So I think there's ways that things can be knitted together, but you have to be open to listening and collaborating. So.
Thank you so much, Julian. I'm going to have to really move this along because we're running out of time. I mean, Joe says, it's impossible to measure because the procurement process focuses on the money and not the impact outcome. And I think that's so true. But I think we do have to, I think we're at a point where we have to redefine what being an architect, what shaping the built environment is. And I think that's the way that we can rock and roll with this and sort of take back the power. So on that note, I'm going to have to now move on to, we wanted to launch our Let's Build Academy brochure. So I'm just going to have Elizabeth, if you could just show that brochure, because this is something that we've been working on behind the scenes for us to be able to partner, allow RIBA Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 architects, give them a sort of safety net and partner them through this entity that we've created with practices by working with universities. And so this is our sort of launch pad, embracing diversity, unlocking value, shaping places. That's our strap line. If you go to this next slide, who we are, what we do, a professional support network operated by influential and outstanding POC professionals in construction industry practice. We're on the ground, passionate, active in our communities, providing unrivaled access to great candidates from these communities. And what we do, we help our BA Part 1, 2, and 3 students from underrepresented backgrounds get introductions to paid work placements. And at the moment, we've got a couple of universities as our partners. They are the Bartlett and Westminster, and a couple of practices, which is Scott Brownrigg and Dab Design. But we want more universities and more partners. And the model is that it's free for students, but the practices pay an annual membership. It can be monthly or annually. We hope and what we want to do, our aim is to bridge that missing link. We are providing that missing link that our graduates from underrepresented groups find where they can't, fulfill their architectural aspirations by simply getting that first job and that first work. If you just show the last page there. And so if you want to get in touch and you're here and you're interested in either, partnering with us or getting students or registering to get some work, please connect, send us a mail, hello@letsbuildit. We are keen to help. And so moving on, I'd like to then at this point call on our marketing team to give the vote of thanks, and then that's going to be followed by a closing statement by Marsha.
I'm Francetta, and Elizabeth, Shanisi and Tyler were part of the marketing team. I just want to say thank you to Hannah Afolabi, Julian McIntosh, Deborah Sant, Marsha Ram Roop and Perugia Wilson, and our vice chair and keynote speaker, Neil. Thank you for the videos, they were great. Thank you for all your opinions and thoughts and answering the questions. And thank you for our audience who have been brilliant. And some of you have asked us some questions which we've answered, which has been amazing. And I hope you guys all take part in Let's Build Academy if you're interested. And please do follow us on social media. We have Instagram, Facebook, and soon TikTok. So we're getting there. But thank you for a great evening.
Thank you, Francetta. Okay, Marsha.
So I'd like to, I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you a poem which was written by Amanda Gorman. And Amanda Gorman, you may know, did the speech, did the poem, The Hill We Climb, at President Biden's inauguration. It was an amazing poem about breaking through and being the light and being the person to take action for the betterment of society. And her anthology, wonderfully named anthology, is Call Us What We Carry. And in this anthology, there is a section about the earth and the environment called Earth Eyes. And there's a particular poem that she's written called Earth Eyes, which is, you probably won't be able to see it, but the way that it's written in the form of, and it's presented in a circular pattern. And I'm going to read for you Earth Eyes by Amanda Gorman. What have we done? Currently, our jaw is clamped down, our shoulders nailed to the ears, bones braced for brutal battle. By think of the next generation, we mean every day this very ground spoils beneath us, for we're bringing to all the ends of the earth the end of all the earth. Please believe us when we say we too ache to imagine something new. Reparation lies not in the land we own, but the very land we owe, the soil and toil we thieved in from the start. Nothing is a grander cemetery than this. Water, drinkable, our air, breathable, birds built and blurred on a breeze, trees heaving huge sighs into the heavens, our children giggling and gilded in the grass. Earnest for the first time, we must earn this turned earth back. Now we're begged to save it. Screech with kids who must fix the world because braving it is no longer enough. The youth will save us, they say. But even that is its own release. Our short lives now aimed at the oily-headed monsters that reared their teeth before we even gave our first wet croak. Generations of the past order, be our recruits, not our rescues. Oh, how we want our parents red and restless, as wild and dying for a difference as we are.
Thank you so much, Marsha. That was fabulous. First of all, I want to just say, Neil, the videos and your presentation was just amazing. I think it was so on point, and it brought home to us all the importance of what we must do as a people to battle climate change, and the fact that we are all responsible and none of us can sit back and give any excuse as to why we're not involved and why we're not participating. Thank you so much, Marsha. Thank you so much to all our panelists. And we've got our next event will be in June. We'll be participating in the London Festival of Architecture. and it's going to be youth directed with Neil and Shay leading on that. And so thank you to all our guests for coming on this evening and staying with us. We appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you at the next one.